Sometimes the smallest act of kindness costs the most and changes the life of the person who receives it forever. I never believed that until the night my 3-year-old daughter gave away the only thing keeping her own tiny lungs safe. Rain hammered against the mansion's towering windows with the steady rhythm of impatient fingers, turning the sprawling estate outside into little more than shadows and silver streaks. I tightened my grip on the cleaning cart as I hurried across the polished marble hallway, praying I could finish my shift before Lily's breathing became any worse. She sat quietly on a folded blanket beside the laundry room door, coloring inside a worn picture book she'd already completed dozens of times. Every few minutes she paused, lifting the small blue inhaler resting in her lap, as if simply holding it made her feel safer. It was the last one we could afford. My paycheck wouldn't arrive until Friday, and after rent, groceries, and daycare, there wasn't enough left for another prescription. "Mommy," Lily called softly, her green eyes following me across the hallway. "Is the storm scary?" I smiled, even though exhaustion weighed heavier than the bucket in my hands. "Only if you let it be." She nodded with the complete confidence only a child could have. "Then I'm not scared." I wished courage worked that way for adults. The mansion had always felt strange after dark. Too quiet. Too expensive. Every polished surface reflected another hallway, another doorway, another reminder that people like me only existed here to clean up after lives we'd never live ourselves. I'd worked for Blackwood Estates for almost 8 months and had never once seen its mysterious owner. Rumors traveled faster than dust among the household staff. Billionaire, businessman, dangerous, untouchable. Everyone had a different story, and none of us asked questions. Questions were expensive. Silence paid by the hour. I had just finished wiping fingerprints from a grand staircase when the lights flickered once. Then again, somewhere deeper inside the estate, something heavy crashed against the floor. I froze. The sound echoed through the enormous house before disappearing into silence. One of the security radios crackled faintly in the distance. Footsteps followed. Fast. Controlled. Urgent. Lily looked up from her coloring book. "Mommy." Before I could answer, a man stumbled into the hallway from a side entrance I had never noticed before. His black suit was soaked from the rain, his normally composed posture replaced by visible strain as he braced one hand against the wall. His breathing came in short, uneven gasps. Every inhale sounded like it fought against an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. His face had gone pale beneath the hallway lights, and although I didn't recognize him, something about the way the security team reacted told me he wasn't an ordinary guest. They rushed toward him but hesitated, exchanging anxious glances instead of answers. One reached for a phone while another searched his pockets with growing panic. "Where is it?" someone whispered. "He doesn't have it." The man tried to take another breath, but his chest barely moved. Fear spread across the room faster than the storm outside. I instinctively stepped toward him before stopping myself. I wasn't a doctor. I was just the maid. Then I felt a tiny hand slip into mine. Lily looked from me to the struggling stranger, then down at the little blue inhaler she still held. Without asking permission, without hesitation, she walked across the marble floor on her small sneakers until she stood directly in front of the man. She lifted both hands and gently pressed the inhaler into his trembling fingers. Her voice was barely louder than the rain. "You can have mine, because you need it more than I do." I could not move. My eyes stayed fixed on Lily as she stretched her tiny arm toward the stranger, her little fingers wrapped around the blue inhaler that had become our family's lifeline over the past year. One of the security men instinctively reached out to stop her, but the older gentleman beside him raised a quiet hand. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The man accepted the inhaler with shaking hands. For one endless second, he looked directly at my daughter, almost confused that someone so small would trust him with something so important. Then he followed the simple picture printed on the side of the device, took a measured breath, and closed his eyes. Another followed, then another. The terrifying struggle that had filled the hallway only moments earlier slowly gave way to deeper, steadier breaths. Color gradually returned to his face, and the tightness around his eyes softened as though someone had quietly lifted an invisible weight from his chest. Relief swept through the room so suddenly that several members of the security team lowered their heads before speaking into their radios. One whispered, "He is stable." Another hurried away without another word. The stranger remained where he was, still kneeling slightly as though gathering strength. When he finally looked at Lily again, there was something unexpected in his expression. It was not pride. It was not authority. It was gratitude so genuine that it almost looked unfamiliar to him. Lily smiled the way only children can, completely unaware of the importance of the moment. "It works," she whispered happily. "I told you." I hurried forward and gently picked her up, my heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. "I am so sorry," I said, embarrassed beyond words. She should not have interrupted. "She is only trying to help." The man slowly stood, noticeably taller than everyone around him, though his movements remained careful, as if every breath still required concentration. His dark eyes met mine for the first time. Calm, observant, impossible to read. "She did not interrupt," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard without raising it. "She saved me." Before I could respond, another man in an expensive suit approached quickly from the opposite hallway, clearly relieved. "Mr. Blackwood, the physician is on the way." The name settled over the room like another clap of thunder. Adrian Blackwood. I felt every story I had ever heard from the staff rush back into my mind at once. The owner of the estate. The man whose companies employed thousands. The man whose schedule could change entire neighborhoods. And my daughter had walked straight up to him as though he were simply another person who needed help. Adrian looked down at the inhaler still resting in his hand. "Whose is this?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "It belongs to my daughter." His eyes lifted immediately. "Does she have another one?" The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt much longer. I forced myself to smile, hoping to avoid the truth. "We will manage." He continued watching me, saying nothing. There was something unsettling about the way he seemed to notice what people chose not to say. Lily leaned against my shoulder, already growing sleepy after the excitement. "It is okay," she murmured. "Mommy always says helping people is never the wrong choice." Adrian looked at her for another long moment before carefully placing the inhaler back into her tiny hand instead of keeping it. His expression remained composed, but something behind his eyes had changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore. For the first time that evening, the most powerful man in the mansion was not looking at the frightened employees surrounding him. He was looking only at the little girl who had given away the one thing she could not afford to lose, and I had the unmistakable feeling that this night was far from over. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily standing in the middle of that enormous hallway, holding out the little blue inhaler with the quiet certainty only a child could possess. By 6 o'clock the following morning, we were already riding the city bus back across Manhattan. Rain had given way to gray skies, leaving thin streaks of sunlight reflecting off wet sidewalks as commuters hurried toward another ordinary Tuesday. Lily rested her head against my shoulder, humming softly while clutching her stuffed rabbit. The inhaler sat safely inside my purse again, but every time I felt its shape through the fabric, guilt tightened inside my chest. We had been lucky, far luckier than we deserved. I promised myself I would find some way to buy another prescription before the week was over, even if it meant taking another overnight shift. By 7:30, I was back at Blackwood Estates. The mansion looked exactly the same as it always had. Immaculate gardens, perfect hedges, long stone walkways that never seemed to collect a single fallen leaf. Yet something felt different. Employees whispered more quietly than usual. Security officers who had never looked twice at me now nodded politely as I entered through the staff entrance. One even opened the door before I reached it. I assumed they were simply relieved that the previous night's emergency had ended well. I kept my head down and pushed my cleaning cart toward the east wing. My routine was comforting because routines did not ask difficult questions. Dust the library shelves. Vacuum the upstairs hallway. Polish the brass railings. Replace fresh flowers in the guest suites. The familiar rhythm steadied my thoughts until Mrs. Harrison, the head housekeeper, appeared at the end of the corridor. She rarely smiled, but this morning her expression seemed unusually tense. "Emily," she called. "The owner wishes to speak with you." My stomach immediately sank. Every possible mistake raced through my mind. Had Lily broken some rule by wandering into the hallway? Had I forgotten to lock a storage closet? Was I about to lose the only steady job keeping food on our table? I followed Mrs. Harrison through rooms I had never been allowed to enter before. Massive windows overlooked acres of private gardens. Paintings lined the walls, each one probably worth more than every apartment I had rented in my entire life combined. We finally stopped outside a quiet sitting room, where sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling glass. Adrian Blackwood stood beside the window with a cup of untouched coffee in his hand. He turned as we entered. Without the chaos of the previous evening surrounding him, he appeared completely composed. Tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, calm eyes that missed nothing. Yet there was a weariness behind them that expensive clothing could not hide. Mrs. Harrison quietly excused herself, leaving the two of us alone. "Please," Adrian said. "Have a seat." I remained standing. "I would rather not, sir. I still have several rooms to finish before noon." A faint smile crossed his face for less than a second. "You are worried this conversation will cost you your job?" I blinked. "Should I be?" "No." His answer came immediately. "Quite the opposite." He walked toward a small table where a neatly wrapped box rested beside an envelope. "Your daughter showed extraordinary kindness last night. I would like to thank both of you." He gently slid the package toward me. I did not touch it. "I appreciate the thought," I answered carefully. But Lily did not help because she expected anything in return. Adrian studied me in silence. "Neither of you even asked who I was." It did not matter. Most people would disagree. I looked down at my worn work shoes before meeting his eyes again. She saw someone struggling to breathe. That was enough for her. And honestly, it was enough for me too. For the first time since entering the room, Adrian seemed to lose the carefully controlled expression he had worn all morning. It lasted only a heartbeat, but I saw genuine surprise, as though my answer made less sense to him than anything he had experienced the night before. The wrapped box remained untouched between us. I thanked Adrian politely one last time, wished him a full recovery, and returned to my cleaning cart before he could say anything else. I could feel his eyes following me as I left the sitting room, but I refused to look back. By lunchtime, the conversation had already begun spreading through the staff quarters. Some employees whispered that I had received an enormous bonus. Others insisted I had been promoted. A few even assumed I would never have to work another day in my life. They were all wrong. I had accepted nothing except permission to return to my normal routine. By the end of my shift, I climbed onto the crowded bus with sore feet, an aching back, and exactly the same paycheck I had expected that morning. Lily greeted me at our apartment with the biggest smile in the world. Mrs. Jenkins, our elderly neighbor who watched her while I worked, waved from the tiny kitchen. "She has been talking about the nice man all day," she laughed. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I hope he can breathe now." I kissed the top of her head. "I think he can, sweetheart." She seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to arranging crayons across the coffee table. After dinner, I opened the refrigerator and quietly counted what we had left. Half a gallon of milk, a few eggs, bread, peanut butter, enough for several more days if we were careful. Then I opened the medicine cabinet. My smile disappeared. The inhaler Lily had handed to Adrian now felt almost weightless in my hand. I shook it gently beside my ear. Almost empty. Maybe 1 or 2 doses remained. No more. My prescription refill was still 4 days away, and without insurance coverage, the pharmacy wanted more money than I could spare this week. I closed the cabinet before Lily noticed my expression. She deserved bedtime stories, not grown-up worries. That same evening, nearly 20 miles away, Adrian sat alone in the private office overlooking the lights of Manhattan. The inhaler had never left his thoughts. He turned the small blue device over in his hand while his chief of security stood quietly across the room. "Tell me about Emily Carter," Adrian finally said. The man hesitated. "Sir, everything." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Less than an hour later, a thin folder rested on Adrian's desk. Employment records, payroll information, public records, apartment address, emergency contacts. Nothing unusual at first glance. Emily Carter, 27 years old, widowed before Lily was born. No criminal record. No debt beyond ordinary medical bills. Adrian continued reading until one receipt clipped near the back caught his attention. It came from a neighborhood pharmacy only 3 blocks from Emily's apartment. Monthly asthma medication. Pediatric dosage. Refilled late almost every month. He frowned. "Why late?" he asked quietly. His security chief checked another page. According to her financial records, she often waits until payday. Adrian remained silent. He turned another page, then another. Hospital visit, emergency clinic, follow-up appointment. Every document carried the same patient's name. Lily Carter, age 3, chronic asthma. His eyes drifted back to the inhaler resting beside the folder. Suddenly, he understood something that no one in that hallway had realized the previous night. The little girl had not offered him an extra inhaler. She had handed him the last medication she had. The physician who had treated Adrian the night before had estimated that one full dose had allowed his breathing to stabilize before further medical care arrived. Adrian slowly leaned back in his chair, the realization settling over him with unexpected weight. Somewhere across the city, the child who had helped save his life was preparing to sleep with almost nothing left to protect her own. For a man who had spent years believing every problem could be solved with influence, planning, or money, this truth landed harder than any business loss ever had. He looked once more at Lily's smiling photograph attached to the employment file, then quietly closed the folder. "Find out whether she is safe tonight," he said, "and do not let Emily know anyone is watching." The next morning began like every other morning in my life. I packed Lily's lunch inside a faded pink backpack, buttoned her little sweater against the cool autumn air, and kissed her forehead before Mrs. Jenkins walked her downstairs to preschool. She waved enthusiastically from the sidewalk, completely unaware that she had become the most important person in the thoughts of a man she would probably never see again. I headed to work, believing life had returned to normal. I could not have been more mistaken. My first surprise came during my lunch break when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. "Mrs. Carter," a cheerful voice asked. "This is Green Valley Pharmacy. Your daughter's asthma medication is ready for pickup." I frowned. There must be a mistake. I have not placed an order. The pharmacist paused. "The prescription was renewed this morning, and payment has already been completed in full for the next 12 months. I stopped walking. "Who paid for it?" "I am sorry, ma'am. The account was marked as anonymous." Before I could ask another question, the call ended. I stood in the employee hallway staring at my phone, convinced someone had confused me with another customer. After work, I walked straight to the pharmacy, expecting them to apologize for the misunderstanding. Instead, the pharmacist smiled warmly before placing a neatly sealed bag on the counter. Inside were not only Lily's inhalers, but also a portable spacer, a digital peak flow meter, extra pediatric masks, and written instructions from a respiratory specialist. Every receipt showed a $0 balance. "Are you sure this belongs to me?" I asked quietly. "Absolutely," the pharmacist replied. "Whoever arranged this wanted to make certain your daughter would never miss another refill." My throat tightened. I thanked her, carried the bag home, and spent the entire bus ride trying to understand how something like this could happen. That evening, Lily clapped her hands with excitement when she saw the new inhalers lined up inside the medicine cabinet. "Now we have lots," she whispered with a smile that made every confusing moment worthwhile. Across the city, Adrian listened silently as his security chief finished the morning report. "The medication has been delivered without revealing your identity. The pediatric specialist has agreed to monitor the child regularly. The apartment building has also received anonymous funding to repair the heating system before winter." Adrian nodded once. "Good. There is one more thing." Adrian looked up. Mrs. Carter attempted to return the medication at the pharmacy because she believed it belonged to someone else. A faint smile crossed Adrian's face. "That sounds like her." His chief hesitated before continuing. "You could simply tell her the truth." Adrian slowly shook his head. "If I place my name on every kindness, it becomes a transaction. Her daughter never asked who I was before helping me. I owe them the same respect." He walked toward the office window overlooking the skyline as late afternoon sunlight reflected across the glass towers below. For years, people had approached him wanting contracts, favors, investments, or influence. Emily Carter had asked for nothing. Lily had expected nothing. Somehow that simple truth weighed more heavily than every business negotiation he had ever completed. He reached into his jacket pocket and found the tiny crayon drawing Lily had accidentally left behind in the mansion after the storm. It showed a smiling stick figure holding hands with another beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, she had written in uneven letters with Mrs. Jenkins helping her spell the words, "Everybody needs somebody." Adrian stared at the drawing much longer than he intended before carefully placing it inside the top drawer of his desk, instead of throwing it away. For the first time in years, one of the most protected men in New York found himself wondering whether the greatest debt he had ever carried could truly be repaid with money alone. I began noticing the same dark gray SUV almost everywhere I went, although I convinced myself it was only coincidence. It sat across the street while I walked Lily into preschool. It waited near the grocery store parking lot while I counted coupons before buying milk. It disappeared whenever I tried to look at the license plate. I told myself the city was full of similar vehicles, and working long hours had simply made me paranoid. Life finally seemed to be improving. Lily had her medication. The apartment building's broken boiler had been repaired without warning. Even Mrs. Jenkins laughed that someone upstairs must have decided our little neighborhood deserved a miracle. I smiled with her, but deep inside I still wondered who had quietly stepped into our lives without asking for thanks. At Blackwood Estates, the atmosphere shifted again. Adrian returned to his regular schedule, yet something about him had changed. He still carried himself with quiet authority, but now he paused to greet gardeners by name, thanked kitchen staff after meals, and once even stopped to help an elderly groundskeeper pick up a box of scattered flower bulbs after the wind knocked it over. The employees noticed. So did I. Nobody understood why. One rainy afternoon, I finished polishing the library shelves when Adrian entered unexpectedly. He glanced toward the window where heavy clouds rolled over the estate before looking back at me. "How is Lily?" he asked. The question surprised me. "She is doing well." Her breathing? Better than it has been in months. Relief flickered across his face so quickly that I almost believed I had imagined it. Before either of us could continue, his phone vibrated. He answered without taking his eyes off the rain outside. His expression gradually hardened. "I understand," he said quietly. "Increase security. Do not alarm the staff." He ended the call and stood silently for several seconds. When he finally looked back at me, the warmth had disappeared behind the calm, unreadable expression I remembered from the first night. "Emily," he said, "when your shift ends today, please go directly home. Do not make unnecessary stops." I frowned. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "I simply prefer my employees to stay safe during the storm." It sounded reasonable, yet something inside me whispered that the weather had nothing to do with it. I collected Lily from preschool exactly as instructed. We boarded the first bus home and settled into the back row while rain streaked across the windows. Lily rested her head against my shoulder and watched raindrops race each other down the glass. "Mommy," she whispered, "the gray car is here again." My heart skipped. I looked outside just as the familiar SUV rolled slowly behind the bus before disappearing into traffic. "Maybe they are going home too," I answered gently, though I no longer believed my own explanation. Several miles away, Adrian stood inside the estate's security operations room, studying live traffic cameras displayed across an entire wall of monitors. One screen followed the city bus carrying Emily and Lily. Another tracked the gray SUV, maintaining a careful distance behind it. His security chief stepped beside him. They found the child faster than we expected. Adrian remained perfectly still. "Have they made contact?" "No. They have only been watching." Adrian folded his arms. "That changes today. Increase the protective detail, but keep it invisible. Emily cannot know." His chief nodded. "If they continue following the family?" Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "Then Emily and Lily stop being employees under my roof. From this moment forward, they are my responsibility." As the bus disappeared beneath the glowing lights of the next intersection, Adrian kept watching the monitor in complete silence, knowing that somewhere beyond the rain someone else had also decided the little girl who had offered one selfless breath was worth paying attention to. I tried to convince myself that Adrian's warning had only been the concern of an employer who had recently survived a frightening medical emergency, but the uneasy feeling followed me everywhere. Every sound outside our apartment seemed louder after dark. Every unfamiliar face lingering near the building held my attention a little longer than it should have. Still, I refused to let fear become part of Lily's childhood. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies, and after breakfast we walked to the neighborhood park carrying peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices packed inside an old canvas tote. Lily raced toward the swings, laughing as autumn leaves danced across the playground. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to relax. Mrs. Jenkins sat beside me on a weathered bench, knitting another tiny scarf for Lily while chatting about nothing more important than the changing weather. Then I noticed the gray SUV again. It was parked half a block away beneath a row of maple trees. My heartbeat quickened. Before I could decide whether I was imagining things, another black sedan quietly pulled into a nearby parking space. Two well-dressed men stepped out carrying coffee cups, looking no different from ordinary professionals enjoying a weekend morning. Yet something about the way they casually positioned themselves near opposite entrances to the playground told me they were watching everything. They never looked directly at me, but somehow I felt safer the moment they arrived. Across town, Adrian sat inside a conference room surrounded by financial reports that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the live updates appearing on his phone. His security chief sent only short messages. Family arrived safely. Playground secure. No direct contact. Adrian placed the phone face down and attempted to focus on business, but every few minutes his eyes drifted back toward the screen. One of his senior executives finally smiled. "You have not been distracted during a meeting in 15 years. Adrian answered honestly. "People change." Back at the park, Lily climbed down from the swing and wandered toward a little boy sitting alone beside the sandbox. He looked about 5 years old. His shoulders slumped as he stared at a broken toy truck with one missing wheel. Without hesitation, Lily knelt beside him and held out her favorite stuffed rabbit. "You can borrow Rosie until your truck feels better," she said with complete sincerity. The little boy smiled for the first time. His mother, standing several yards away, wiped tears from her eyes before quietly thanking me. I shook my head. That is just who she is. Neither of us noticed Adrian approaching from the walking path until Lily looked up and waved excitedly. "The breathing man," she shouted with delight, loud enough for half the playground to hear. Adrian stopped, then laughed softly, a sound I doubted many people had ever heard from him. He walked over carrying a simple paper bag from a neighborhood bakery instead of the expensive gifts I had quietly refused before. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said. We were nearby after a meeting. I knew that explanation was probably not true, but I let it pass. Lily ran over and hugged his leg before I could stop her. Adrian looked momentarily surprised, then carefully crouched to her eye level. "How are your lungs today?" he asked. Lily took one dramatic, deep breath before spreading her arms wide. "Super strong." Adrian smiled. "I am glad." She studied his face with innocent curiosity before asking the question no adult ever would. "Are you still one of the scary rich people everybody whispers about?" I nearly dropped the juice box I was holding. My face burned with embarrassment. "Lily." But Adrian simply looked at her for a long moment before answering with quiet honesty. "Sometimes people have good reasons to whisper." Lily considered his answer carefully, then reached up and placed one tiny hand against his cheek. "Mommy says people can make better choices tomorrow than they made yesterday." The playground seemed to disappear around us. Adrian did not speak. He simply closed his eyes for a brief second, as though those few innocent words had reached a place inside him that years of success, power, and respect never had. I did not realize how carefully Adrian had woven himself into our lives until the illusion unraveled all at once. Monday morning began with an unexpected visit from the manager of our apartment building. He knocked on my door carrying a folder and an expression that seemed almost apologetic. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "there has been a change regarding your lease." My heart immediately sank. I assumed the rent had increased again. Instead, he handed me a document showing that the building had received a private housing grant covering repairs, security improvements, and reduced rent for several struggling families, including mine. "Who donated this?" I asked. He smiled politely. "The paperwork requires complete confidentiality." That answer sounded strangely familiar. Later that afternoon, Lily finished her routine checkup with the pediatric respiratory specialist. The physician reviewed new test results with visible satisfaction. "Her breathing is improving much faster than expected," he explained. Whoever arranged her treatment made certain she had access to the best equipment available. I looked up from Lily's medical chart. "Arranged?" The doctor hesitated before realizing he had said too much. "I assumed you knew." My stomach tightened. "Knew what?" He slowly closed the folder. "A private benefactor requested that every recommended treatment be approved immediately. There was never any concern about cost." The room suddenly felt much smaller. Images from the past several weeks rushed through my mind. The anonymous pharmacy payment, the repaired heating system, the medical equipment that appeared without explanation, the quiet concern Adrian had shown every time he asked about Lily. The answer became impossible to ignore. I left the clinic with Lily holding my hand, but instead of taking the bus home, I asked the driver to stop near Blackwood Estates. 20 minutes later, I stood inside the same sunlit sitting room where Adrian had once offered me a wrapped gift I refused to accept. He entered a few moments later, immediately recognizing the expression on my face. "You know," he said quietly. I nodded. "The medication, the specialists, the apartment repairs, the rent assistance. It was all you." Adrian did not deny it. "Yes." My voice trembled with emotions I could no longer separate. Gratitude, frustration, pride, confusion. Why would you hide something like that? He looked out the window before answering. "Because your daughter never asked who I was before she decided I deserved to breathe. I wanted my help to be just as unconditional." I stared at him, unsure whether to be angry or deeply moved. "You should have told me. Would you have accepted it?" The question stole every prepared answer from my mind. I looked away first. "Probably not." Adrian gave the smallest nod. "Exactly." Silence settled between us. It was not uncomfortable. It simply carried the weight of truths finally spoken aloud. Lily, who had been quietly coloring at the coffee table while the adults talked, suddenly walked over holding another crayon drawing. She handed it to Adrian with a bright smile. It showed 3 stick figures beneath a giant blue sky. One figure wore a tiny necktie. One held a feather duster. The smallest stood between them holding both of their hands. Across the top, she had carefully written with backward letters, "Families help each other." Adrian accepted the drawing with both hands as though it were something priceless. His voice became almost a whisper. "Emily, there is something you deserve to know as well." I looked up. The night your daughter helped me was not an ordinary medical emergency. Since then, certain people have been watching my life very closely. I believed I could keep that separate from yours. I was wrong. My heartbeat quickened. The gray SUV. Adrian nodded once. They were never following me anymore. His eyes met mine with complete honesty. They were watching the little girl who changed everything. For a long moment, I could not say a single word. I looked at Lily, peacefully adding yellow flowers around the 3 stick figures she had drawn, completely unaware that adults were discussing dangers far beyond anything a child should ever carry. I turned back to Adrian. "Then why? Are you telling me now?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because protecting someone begins with respecting them enough to tell the truth." Those words stayed with me long after I left the mansion that evening. Nothing about my life looked different from the outside. I still wore the same housekeeping uniform. I still rode the same crowded bus home. I still tucked Lily into the same tiny bed beside the apartment window every night. But something inside me had changed. For weeks I had believed anonymous kindness had simply fallen from the sky. Now I understood that every quiet blessing had come from one man who believed he owed a debt that could never truly be repaid. The following Saturday, Adrian invited us to the estate for lunch. Not in the formal dining hall with polished silver and endless etiquette, but in the small garden behind the greenhouse where roses climbed old stone walls and birds filled the afternoon with cheerful songs. Lily ran through the grass, chasing butterflies, while I poured iced tea into 3 simple glasses. It was the first time I had ever seen Adrian without the invisible walls that usually surrounded him. He laughed when Lily insisted he help build a tiny birdhouse from a beginner's kit she had received at preschool. He patiently held crooked wooden pieces while she proudly hammered plastic nails that barely reached halfway into the holes. When the little birdhouse finally stood on its own, leaning slightly to one side, Lily clapped with delight. "It is perfect," she declared. Adrian smiled. "It is not perfect." Lily shook her head confidently. "It is loved. That is better." He looked at the little wooden house for several quiet seconds before whispering, almost to himself, "I think you are right." Later that afternoon, Adrian walked with me along the garden path, while Lily collected colorful leaves nearby. "The people watching my world have disappeared," he said calmly. "My security team confirmed it this morning. They realized there was nothing to gain by following yours." Relief washed over me so suddenly that I nearly cried. "So it is finally over?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." We continued walking beneath the golden leaves without speaking. Sometimes silence carries more gratitude than words ever could. Before we reached the end of the path, Adrian stopped. Emily, I cannot erase every difficult year you and Lily have lived through. He looked toward my daughter, who was proudly holding up the brightest red leaf she could find. But as long as I have the ability to help, neither of you will ever have to face those years alone again. I believed him, not because of his wealth or influence, but because I had watched him change. The man who once measured life through power now measured it through people. As the afternoon sun dipped lower across the gardens, Lily ran toward us with both hands full of leaves. She slipped one small hand into mine and the other into Adrian's as naturally as if she had done it forever. Come on, she laughed. Families are supposed to walk together. Adrian looked down at our joined hands, and I saw tears quietly gather in eyes that had faced success, loss, responsibility, and impossible decisions without ever revealing emotion. He squeezed Lily's hand gently before looking at me with a grateful smile. In that moment, I finally understood that my daughter had never really saved only one man's life. By giving away one precious breath on a stormy night, she had reminded a weary little girl that hope could still exist, shown a struggling mother that kindness is never wasted, and taught one of the most powerful men in the city that the greatest strength is not found in the people you can command, but in the hearts you choose to protect. Sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest miracles, and sometimes one selfless breath becomes the beginning of an entirely new life for everyone it touches.